like a bunch of crazy shit just starts happening, and like there's spirits like butchering like the other spirit and like throwing its body parts all over the stage. It's like bonkers crazy.
Oh my God. She's like Ozzy Osbourne meets like a mega church.
Yeah, Keith Richards showing up at your kid's like talent show and just like pushing him off the stage and grabbing his guitar and like playing tumbling dice or something like that. It's just like, It's like, what the fuck's going on here?
What a day.
Yeah, right?
History, I'd like to follow me down the rabbit hole. History, I'd like to, frankly, I want to know.
Hey, hello, and welcome to HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck, where history is a party and everybody's coming. I am your host, Dawn Brody. And today we are going to the island of Lemuria, a fascinating piece of land that stretches from the Indian Ocean all the way to Mount Shasta in California. And Lemuria is believed by some to be not only the biological source of lemurs, but all of mankind. Okay, and if you send enough money to various spiritualists and occultists around the world, you can own a piece of Lemuria yourself. Hell, some will even send you a crystal key so that you can go in if you can only find the door. Now, as you may have guessed, Lemuria is completely made up. It never existed. It began as a theoretical land bridge to explain the mystery of how lemurs got to Madagascar, okay? And it was then hijacked by a series of spiritualists and occultists who credit it for everything from the origin of humans to Pizzagate to the lizard people they say still live under Los Angeles. Okay, it's a wild story, and my guest literally wrote the book on it. Historian, archivist, and writer Justin McHenry joins me to tell this absolutely bananas tale of Lemuria, a true story of a fake place. Let's get started. We are recording remotely. My understanding is that you are in West Virginia. Is that true?
I am West by God, Virginia. Yep.
West by God, Virginia. And that kind of is how we got introduced, because my understanding is that you got hipped to the Blair Mountain HILF episode.
Yeah.
That was so cool. And you reached out and you were like, I'm a historian. And I was like, I'm a historian.
I would say the Blair Mountain is one of our, I guess, biggest historical events in West Virginia history. It's an important event in labor history here in America, and so it's just it was a great episode, and so I just had to reach out to you.
I'm so glad you did. Tell me how you got into history in general. Was it Blair Mountain that pulled you into the historical arts?
Well, that's a great question. So yeah, I am born and raised here in West Virginia. So, and like, I just love history. I love the stories in history. It's like an infinite well of stories to be discovered and find. And so, going into college, I was in like a mass communications major, and then I quickly changed the history because I was like, it's just what I loved and what I find interesting and fascinating. And so I actually got my master's degree in West Virginia history. And so being here in West Virginia, I did not want to stay whatsoever. I wanted to get as far away as possible. And then all of a sudden I ended up getting a degree in the state's history. And so it just kind of just kept it up from there. Just I lucked out in becoming an archivist. That's what I do now. And I have been an archivist for 10 or 12 years now. And so just to be with history every day and it's just it's fascinating. It's fascinating to look at the original documents and just having that personal connection with the past and being able to explore it and all of that.
Oh, how cool. And you get to hang out with them primary sources, man. You've earned your leather patches.
Exactly.
On the elbows of your jacket.
The last job I had, I was a county archivist, and their historical records go back to the 1800s or 1700s, 18th century. And so like I have breathed in so much like 18th century document dust. I'm like part
you
colonial,
got it
I think.
inside you. It's it's melded with you.
It is, and it has probably taken away 5 years of my life because of that. So.
Who wants those last 5 are probably garbage anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. And you've covered a lot of different arenas. We're obviously going to talk about this fascinating story of the lost continent of Lemuria, but you've written about the Revolutionary War, you've ghost hunting, gardening. Yep. I mean, you're all over the place, man.
I really am. Well, that's the thing. I find the stories themselves interesting and wanting to explore those. And so instead of being, I guess, focused narrowly on a certain time period or place, or labor history or something like that, or a certain topic, I like whatever I find interesting, I want to explore and dive into.
Yeah. Oh, girl, I'm dancing to that number, man. It's my favorite thing about doing this podcast is like every 2 weeks, I just get to pick up a whole new subject and individual and time and place and just go, plug my nose and just jump all the way in. To that end, I mean, because you have such a vast array of interests and you have access to so many dope materials, what was it that focused you on this particular story, the island of Lemuria?
Oh, well, like since I was a kid, I've always been interested in, I don't know, the weird and unknown things. So yeah, I was watching Unsolved Mysteries way too young as a child.
Me
and
too.
So, yeah, just watching those episodes. And I distinctly remember like the alien abduction episodes and then just staying up as a kid, well past midnight, waiting for like this bright white light to shine through my window and just abduct me as a child. Never happened, not that I know of. But
there's still time.
Yeah, right. That's knock on wood. But yeah, that kind of morphed into like the X-Files and then, just opened a whole new world to me. And so being in that arena, I've kind of knew a couple of the figures that are part of the Lemuria story, primarily, knowing about Madame Blavatsky and all that she did. Also the Shaver mysteries and knowing about just the crazy stuff that like he was talking about. So knowing all of that, and just honestly, when the like pandemic started, just wanting something to do. So I was like, hey, let's just write a book. Let's find a good topic. And so I knew about Lemuria and just wanting to like, yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and do it. Let's just jump into it.
It is so great and like super readable too. I always tell my listeners about my sources, and I mean, I've never really encountered a source that I hated. Like even if I found it to be very simple or very boring or it usually still feeds my layer of understanding of it really well, you know what I mean? But also when you get a book that's actually just like really fun, like a genuine nonfiction page turner, right? And,
yeah.
And definitely that's what this is. You like cut the fat and you just kind of get from like hot, sexy topic to hot, sexy topic. And it's so cool. So my plan, and I also listened to, in addition to your book, I listened to you on other podcasts. I've spent time with your website. I read your blog. You have that lovely blend that some historians have where you can stay true to the known archivist documented facts while leaving space for things like how hot they must have been, how frustrating this situation probably was, the anxiety and the human and the tension around it. And it's great. It's just a joy.
Yeah. Being an archivist, you get that connection with the past. And so one of the greatest things I ever found was like looking at like a document from like the 1780s or whatever. And you just see the marginalia of it. And it's just people like doodling in the margins of these documents. And it's just like, man, these people were just as bored as hell as I was back in the, like doing their job and just trying to pass the time so they can clock out. And so it's just like creating those connections and being able to, put yourself in other people's places and figuring out how they lived and how they would act and things like that.
Well, here is my plan for the fucking of these here lemurs with you, Justin. Because as we've established, spoiler alert, Lemuria is made up. It does not exist and it has never existed. And for that reason, I think one of the best ways to tell the story is in the way you do in your book, which is via the people who created and then perpetuated this mythical place. And so the way that I've kind of broken it up in my head is I'm going to stop with my favorites because this book is full of wild, colorful loons, but I'm going to stop on a few of my favorites. In particular, I've broken them up into the scientists, the early folks who were making a genuine attempt at a scientific hypothesis, a little bit into the science fiction, the folks who were like, oh, I don't know if this is real or not, but it's a really great fucking setting for my adventure novel, right? Mm-hmm. And then the spiritualists and or con men who used the belief in this place as a way to do all kinds of crazy fucking shit.
Yeah.
And so what I'll do is I'll try to kind of bring our listeners, I'll lay the foundation, I'll kind of bring our listeners up to speed on what they need to know going in, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, the expert, to really fill in all those beautiful details.
Wonderful. That's what I'm here for.
Awesome. Do you have anything to drink? I know you're hydrated. Do you have a cocktail? It's fairly early in the day here, but hell.
No, I'm not. I'm at work, so no.
Okay, so you have it under the desk.
Yes,
Understood.
I was looking out the window, but I'm the only person in my building too, so it's not like it's a big deal.
There's drinking alone, and then there's drinking oh so alone.
right. It's like I haven't reached that level of a problem yet.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. Then we're moving in with a sense of optimism. So, Joseph, I feel like where I have to start with this story is with lemurs themselves, because lemurs are very fucking weird. And if lemurs themselves weren't so goddamn strange, none of this stuff would have happened to begin with, right? So for those of you who are like, you can probably picture a lemur. They're at most zoos. They're not that uncommon. You've seen the movie Madagascar, the one who likes to move it, right? And lemurs are only found naturally, organically, evolutionarily. They are only found on Madagascar. There's over 100 different species of them there, and they are primate. They're not related to the apes of anywhere else. It's a mystery. They're also totally unique in some sociological ways, like a ringtail lemur, you tell us, is one of the only creatures on Earth where the males submit always to the females.
Right.
And it's nuts, right? And so in the 1850s, they're looking at these lemurs on Madagascar, man, and we're kind of brand new to modern science. And they're looking at it and they're like, well, we have no fucking idea how these weird animals just evolved on their own in just this one little island. And they start to come up with some theories. And Justin, if you could just kind of take it from there with what was it about the scientists of the 1850s and these weird little creatures that draws us in?
Well, I think science in general in the 19th century, like scientists weren't as specialized as they are now. A lot of scientists back then were also like, they were zoologists and biologists, and they were geologists, and they just spanned, like, I talk about Alfred Russel Wallace, and he was, into astronomy. He was into like social issues. He was also into disproving flat earthers and the study of alien creatures. And so like these scientists had like just broad spectrums that they looked at. And so one scientist like that was a fella by the name of Philip Lutley Schlater, who came up with the idea of Lemuria. And so he was just looking over all the mammals of Madagascar and just going down through everything. And he was like, okay, well, we have lemur-like species in South America. We have lemur-like species in Africa. We have lemurs in Africa. And we got these lemur-like species over in India and Asia. So they had to come from somewhere. So something had to, connect them. And so he comes up with this idea of this land bridge connecting basically South America, Africa, from Africa to Madagascar, and from Madagascar on up to India. And he was like, you know what, let's mic drop this and just call this place Lemuria.
It's such a cool name.
It really is. It was the only thing that stuck.
It was great. And I do want to, like, for context too, this is all around, like our guy Darwin wrote Origin of Species in 1859. So that's sort of in the stew. We have sort of accepted generally that that there is an alternative to creationism and that these creatures, or at least a companion to creationism, and that it kind of came via evolution, right? But we're still before the understanding of Pangea and tectonic plates. So there really is, it's sort of a gap. And folks are just throwing things against the wall. And so it's not bizarre to be like, well, we know some things that are now above water. It used to be below water.
Yeah.
And we know some things below water used to be above water. I got an idea. It was an island, man, full of lemurs. And it had a big old land bridge. And again, we know there have been land bridges. This is not absurd.
Yeah. Panama is a land bridge. It's a great example of like what a land bridge looks like and how it works. So.
And so you wouldn't be nuts. Everyone's nodding and they're like, ooh, and what a cool name, Lemuria. And then our guy, Ernest Haeckel, am I saying it right?
I say Haeckel.
Haeckel. I think I'll go with that. Haeckel. Okay. This guy, Ernest Haeckel, is like, hell yeah. Hell yeah. He's all in on Lemuria. And tell me where our guy, Ernest, takes it next.
So yeah, right after Schlatter coins the term Lemuria, you have this guy, Haeckel, coming along, who's a German biologist, zoologist, and early adopter of Darwin's evolutionary theories. He was the biggest Darwin fanboy you can think of.
Yeah, he's running around like, check it out, guys.
Yeah, he is the type of guy that was sending Darwin his like press clippings and stuff like that to try to like impress him and stuff.
Nice.
Like
That's
it
cute.
was pretty sweet. And he did the work. Like he was actually like a field researcher doing evolutionary studies on like tiny little crustaceans in the Mediterranean, stuff like that. But he comes along and writes a book called The History of Creation that goes really in depth into human evolution. And so, yeah, you brought up On the Origin of Species. So that's where Darwin sets forth his ideas on evolution and natural selection and all that. But the one thing he doesn't get into in that book is human evolution. He thought that it would stir too much. He's already stirring the pot enough. He didn't want to fucking overflow it with we also came from apes, guys. I just want you to know that.
Yeah, he's like, we'll just give him little bits absorbable pieces.
Yeah, but he does do that in The Descent of Man, his next book, or the book that talks about human evolution from him. But in between those two, Haeckel writes The History of Creation. And so it was I would say a big hit, for however big a scientific book on evolution in the 19th century can be.
And it was in part because of the pictures, right? Like he was such a good artist and he'd draw these really beautiful, colorful maps. So, I mean, it's why my daughter likes the books. She likes.
And they actually, there's been collections of his drawings and paintings that have been put out in book form that you can go out and see. And he's a really wonderful artist, actually.
And probably why it gets passed down through so many people, right? And some of our loonies yet to come their imagination would have been so peaked. Their emotions and their ideas are very have a place in Haeckel's stuff.
Yeah. And also just the weight of him, being like he was such a known figure, a known scientific figure. And so him coming forward and like really cementing Lemuria as a place helped give it weight and helped give it some sort of existence in nature and in our past. And so his big thing was, so he was all into human evolution. And so for him, he needed a paradise for the actual nuts and bolts of human evolution to take place on. And Lemuria provided that like perfect idea of a place, and he put his right in the middle of the Indian Ocean,
right there, the Garden of Eden, baby.
Yep, exactly. And so for him, that was the cradle of humanity, was Lemuria. And just that idea was so weighty and such a he gave it such like importance that it really others took the ball and ran with it afterwards.
Yeah, and there were some folks too that would have encountered this idea and may have already been reminded of Atlantis, right? It's hard to get very far in discussing Lemuria and not even wondering if it is Atlantis. Yeah, by a different name, and it does kind of bring us into our science fiction writers, because you and I, so far, Justin and I have been talking about the mid 19th century, from, give or take 1830s to like 18. I think Darwin's the evolution of man was like the 1860s or something like that. But that's kind of the ballpark, right? Time we're talking about. Yeah. You go back to 400 BC, girl, and you've got Plato. He's the first OG given us any reference to the concept of these sunken ancient cities that once were and are now beneath the waves. Yeah. But what I love is how many times you make it clear in your book that Plato is telling a parable, man. Just like Haeckel's map was not a map he drew from any physical exploration. It's a map drawn completely from his imagination on where this place might have been. And Plato is writing about sort of a warning tale about a city, what happens to it if you run the wrong way. And he doesn't even finish the story. Yeah. What I love, Justin, can you tell us? So Plato in his one, again, sort of pseudo reference to Atlantis, he names the place, he talks about it. And the last line is unfinished, which is not normal. Plato doesn't have a lot of like dangling unfinished works, right?
Yeah, no, it wasn't like a two-parter. It wasn't like, come back next season for the finale.
Exactly. The line, he's talking about how Zeus is about to punish these Atlanteans. And the last line is, quote, "And when he called them together, he spake as follows." That's it. He doesn't say. It's like the story itself is as sunken and invisible as the place he references. But this is the reference.
Atlantean blue balls for everybody right there.
Exactly. And people who then they translate Plato, right, in like the 1400s. And this is about the time Columbus is sailing the ocean blue. So we're like, oh, shit, man, are you serious? There could be whole ancient kingdoms sunken under the ocean. This is nuts. But our guy, Jules Verne, writes 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where he goes around the Atlantis and sees these ruins and makes it even more colorful in our minds. Yeah. But then tell us about what changes when the story of Atlantis gets into the hands of Ignatius Donnelly.
Yeah, and so it's important to know, like, today Atlantis, like, is fairly known. Like, I think most people know that Atlantis was some sort of lost city, continent, whatever. But it's a widely known thing or place or idea. Some people believe it's true. Some people like just think of it as just an idea. But it's a known thing. But so back when Donnelly was writing back in the 1880s, it was not as known and not as well known, and it was certainly not like studied like it is today. And so he took it to be a real place, and he was really one of the first people to try to discover where the real Atlantis was. And so he went about it. And so I guess it's also important to say who Ignatius Donnelly was too. Oh. Because he would fit so well into like today's political culture.
You want to talk about margin writing, man? Yeah, I wrote all over the margins on this guy. He'd love 2024. This guy would have really thrived on 8chan.
Yeah, he really would. He would be there on January 6th and stuff like that. So
headdress, the whole thing.
Yeah. So, he was a politician from Minnesota. He served in the House of Representatives during the Civil War for Minnesota. And then afterwards, he became like a populist and was in and out of office, like in the state government for a number of years. And so in one of his down political periods, he's like, well, I need something to do with my life, because he was also a failed farmer. So he had a lot of failure going on in his life.
Listen, it's also Minnesota. I lived there for almost 20 years. You got that stretch of time between like November and June.
Right.
Sucks.
Yeah. And it like especially sucks too if like you're on a farm that doesn't like produce anything. Yeah. And so you have a particularly even longer stretch of time to do shit. And so, he just went about like amateur historian, like geologist, everything, and trying to find Atlantis. And so he was really like the first one to do these kind of cross cross-cultural comparisons between places, to try to find connections, to try to prove that Atlantis was a real place and it was there out in the Atlantic Ocean. I think he put his near the Azores off of Spain. And so, yeah, he really like went all in on it too. And it was like he wrote a book. Book was called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World.
Yes.
And it was a huge hit. It was like a bestseller of the year. I think 1888 was. And so, yeah, like the next year, Mardi Gras theme was Atlantis theme because of that. And it went through like dozens and dozens of editions. It was, on up until like the 1940s and 1950s, there were new editions being printed out. So it was like a very popular book that helped propel Atlantis into the zeitgeist of culture, and it really has kept it there since. Atlantis hasn't really gone away since then.
No, and it's a great themed water park. Where I grew up in the Dells, they have Atlantis Water Park, and you don't want to miss it. Lots of great themed restaurants. I mean, I think we can all agree it has its perks. But yeah, to your point, this is 1888, which means going into the 20th century, curious minds, your literary types, now have available to them a reference to something like Lemuria in the form of Atlantis from 400 BC that has now been racketed into popular culture. You said the Mardi Gras, science fiction, these popular sold, and they're coming to us from statesmen, congressmen who have written books, and he in no way considered his book fiction. This is a nonfiction book that will help you find the very real, very literal place of Atlantis. And that gives all sorts of stuff for this legend to continue to build, the fertile soil for these things to grow. But there are still a lot of holes. I think it's clear. And the good news is we got bullshit to fill up them holes. And so when we come back from our break, Justin and I are going to go through some of the crackpots and lunatics that pick up the legend from here. Be right back.
Hi, I'm Hal Loveland.
And I'm Mark Gagliardi.
And we're the hosts of We Got This with Mark and Hal, the weekly show where we settle the debates that are most important to you.
That's right. What arguments are you and your friends having that you just can't settle?
Apples or oranges?
Marvel or DC?
Fork versus spoon?
Chocolate or vanilla?
Best bagel?
What's the best Disney song?
We Got This with Mark and Hal. Every week on Maximum Fun, we do the arguing so you don't have to.
Oh, all answers are final for all people for all time.
We got this.
Before Justin and I go deeper down the rabbit hole, a moment to recognize my favorite crackpots, my patrons. The latest to hop in bed with the pod are Kelly V, Gilby J, and Diana F. Now, whether on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, these generous lovers help keep me supplied with the books, subscriptions, and tech I need to keep the history coming. To join their illustrious ranks and find out what's in it for you, see the links in the show notes, find us on Patreon, or head over to Instagram and
Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow.
for me, this is when the music in the movie starts to get like dum dum dum. You know, because it's fun and funny, and like everything so far is like, oh, cute. They wrote a book. They did a Mardi Gras theme. People's imaginations are being stirred. What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
And now we start to get into what is wrong with that, girl.
Yeah, and it's like you're at the top of the roller coaster, and it's about to just plummet down.
Yeah,
down and down, down.
And I can't say, and I don't think that your book really says that Madame Blavatsky was the first person to like take into a spiritual realm this idea, but she was certainly one of the first, and undoubtedly the loudest and the most prolific and the most well-read. For Uber listeners of HILF, I have mentioned her before actually in my episode on fairies and the history of fairies, because we talk about the Covington fairies and the photographs that these little girls were claiming that they took of these fairies in the woods that they later admitted was a hoax. And one of the early believers of that was the very same Madame Blavatsky and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and their Theosophist Society. Justin, can you tell us more about not just Madame Blavatsky, but what it was about Lemuria that really caught her attention?
Oh, so if people don't know who she is, she's really one of the most consequential people of the 19th century. And I only say that just because, like, we're still living in like what she has produced and what she has gone forward. Like, so all of the new age stuff that's going around right now can be basically linked directly back to her. So any of like the woo woo kind of stuff that's like on TikTok or Instagram or wherever, like you can thank her for that. And also like basically she helped bring to a Western world the Buddhism and Hinduism, are just like exposing the Western world to those ideas that haven't really been done before her.
And she told these stories about how she snuck into Tibet. I mean, according to her, she snuck into Tibet and spent years being trained by those masters. Her parents and her grandparents were occultists and spiritualists. She like grew up with all these like library books around her. She was Russian, which helped Americans. Because anybody who talks with an accent like this, we go, oh my God, yeah, they sound very mystical,
Oh, she was like, oh, man, like, and she had this crazy life. Like the first 40 years of her life was this crazy, and she had this crazy middle period there in her 20s, 30s, where she just kind of disappears and travels the world.
Just like Jesus, like, man, just like most of your prophetic really, figures, right?
Exactly, yeah. Jesus, and like. That's a great thing because mystery school leaders like Pythagoras, from going back to Pythagoras and going forward to like Jesus and other people who have done these kind of travels and learned from mystics in Egypt and mystics in India and elsewhere. So it was very much a set pattern that has been there before, and so she was just either living that life like they lived, or saying she lived that life like they did.
She knows the biography, right?
Yeah. But she was very intelligent though, so like even if she didn't go to these places or what, like she still knew about them and studied them at least. So
yeah, and she's super compelling to look at too. Even just there's just a couple of like still headshot photos of her, and man, I'm telling you, in black and white. Just glancing at the page, you are like kind of struck by her. She's compelling.
She had those like crazy like Rasputin eyes. She had like really like those eyes that would just like suck you in and like, oh, okay, let's do that. She ends up in America in 1876 or so, and hooks up like I don't go to this in the book, but you need to look into her. Like how she breaks onto the scene in America, because it's another crazy ass story. Because she gets into the spiritualism and stuff here and stuff. But she basically there was a spiritualist show going on in Vermont. These two brothers had this like show that they put on where they were conjuring spirits up and they were doing stuff like that. But she just didn't come. She goes and visits it and takes over the show herself. And just starts like a bunch of crazy shit just starts happening, and like there's spirits like butchering like the other spirit and like throwing its body parts all over the stage. It's like bonkers crazy.
Oh my God, she's like Ozzy Osbourne meets like a mega church.
Yeah, Keith Richards showing up at your kid's like talent show and just like pushing him off the stage and grabbing his guitar and like playing tumbling dice or something like that. It's just like It's like what the fuck's going on here?
What a day.
Yeah, right. So it's just a whole other level that she brought, but it was at that place that she met Henry Steele Olcott, who was another fascinating guy. And those two got together and became best of friends real quick. and they created the Theosophical Society, and the Theosophical Society is still around today, going strong. She ends up writing two books, Isis Unveiled, and then The Secret Doctrine. And it's in The Secret Doctrine, which is her like, she goes into everything in The Secret Doctrine. It's like 1,500, 1,800 pages of just really, really dense writing. So, and she was all in on like how Haeckel was all about the, human evolution, like the actual, scientific evolution. She was all in on the spiritual evolution. And so she was combating Haeckel all throughout The Secret Doctrine. It's really, really funny just because it's like a diss track. It's like if Kendrick Lamar and Drake were, racist white 19th century people.
Yeah, well, it is because it's so crazy. And there's so much like, she's relying on his research and she's referencing him in part because he's so reliable and everybody knows him and she's using all of his maps and stuff. But whenever she references him, she's like, and this idiot.
Yeah, and this asshole
thinks this fucking dumb shit. And it is kind of an eating your own tail mentality.
Yeah, it's just because she steals a lot from him as well. It's just kind of funny. But so a part of her spiritual evolution was man goes through this 7 stages. So we started off as these purely ethereal, just ideas. And in the second stage, we become more solid, but still not like a solid being. And then in the third stage, third root race, they're root races, I'm sorry. So yeah, race plays a huge part in all of the Lemuria story for some reason. But in the third one is when we stop being ethereal beings and become actual physical beings. And that all takes place on Lemuria for her. And like to her credit, she is only like she says it throughout The Secret Doctrine. She's only using the term Lemuria just because everybody else before her, like Haeckel and Schlater, have used the term Lemuria. And like its name could be whatever.
Which is kind of crazy because later, when we do begin to understand the existence of Pangea and tectonic plates, it is easy for people to be like, see, she knew the whole time. She even said, maybe it's not Lemuria, which is like a ding. This bitch had it right, and everything she wrote must be right. Yeah.
This is where like Lemuria starts getting fun, is because like her Lemurians start off as like basically Cyclops, and they're like they have telekinetic powers, and they're like communicating with each other. They're building cities, and they're they're hermaphrodites as well.
And they have one eye, but then they get 3 eyes, and then the one eye.
And then they go back to 2 eyes, and so
If for those of you who might be big fans of Hedwig and the Angry Inch, there's actually a fantastic song in that musical called "The Origin of Love" that references these Lemurian creatures and how and how we didn't know what love was until we split into male and female, and we're looking for our other part. It's very sweet, but I love that it's
awesome.
One of the wonderful things that grew from this bullshit garden.
Folks roamed the earth like big rolling kegs. They had 2 sets of arms, they had 2 sets of legs, they had
that all takes place on Lemuria. Is this kind of like physical transformation of us being, and they were giants too right now. I'd say we're Cyclops, but we're like 300-foot giants. And we're slowly evolving spiritually and physically down to our, normal human sizes. And then we will finally, when we become humans, is that when the 4th root race takes place on the Atlantis. And so she was the really first tie Lemuria and Atlantis together as like cousins to one another. And then we move on to the 5th root race, which was which I think is what we're on now. And then the 6th root race will take place in America. And then the 7th root race, which is like basically we become truly enlightened beings, and all is well in the world, in the galaxy, in the universe.
And won't that be a wonderful day?
Yeah, right.
And it's one of those that I feel like intentionally or otherwise, it's written in such a dense and incomprehensible way that you sort of feel like if you don't understand it, then you're not at her level. So people have been very difficult to admit when things are confusing. And when reason and understanding does occasionally come out, like the outline of like, okay, so basically there's 7 root races. We go like this. You go, oh my God, I did get it. Uh-oh. Right? And people, oh my God.
What does that say about me?
What does it say about me? And it goes on and well-read and circulated among certainly a certain population extensively. And this becomes part of, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, of what influences our friend Frederick Spencer Oliver. Is it true that he had read Madame Blavatsky's treatment before his visions?
That's, I believe so, just because he uses the term
Root
Christianity in his book. So that Theo leads me to believe it's theosophical. And also just, he had some knowledge of like Hinduism and Buddhism.
This guy, Frederick Spencer Oliver, you guys, this is like, buckle up. This kid, basically, he's a fairly normal dude by all accounts. And then he starts hearing voices that are speaking so clearly and so directly about Lemuria, origins of humanity, the future of humanity, and in these and he tells his parents, right? He hides it at first, and his parents are like, "What the fuck is up with you, man?" And he's like,
"Why being such a weird teen for?
Why are you being so nuts?" Yeah, and he's like, "Well, I gotta tell you, I'm hearing these voices tell me," and his parents are like, "Well, we better write that down then." And see who is speaking, which, you know, people, I mean, depending on your spiritual ideology, there's nothing nuts about voices in general. That's how the divine speaks to people in all sorts of traditions. But specifically, he starts talking about how that 7th root race that is mentioned by Madame Blavatsky, the idea of where humanity is evolving from Lemuria. Yes, check, all the hoo-ha. But that they've ended up now under Mount Shasta in California. That is where all Lemurians currently live, according to our buddy Frederick Spencer Oliver. And I mean, we could talk for probably 3 more episodes about this guy. But if you, Justin, could tell us more about him, how this leads to Teresa Kerr. I mean, it's
oh, man.
This is so batshit. Yeah. It's so great.
Yeah. So he was just a normal kid out in California. And he started hearing this voice in his head when he was 17 or so. And it was the voice of Philos, who was a former Atlantean cabinet member who was also in another life a former Californian prospector.
Because the bureaucracy of Lemuria, honestly, is ridiculous. Like,
yes,
it's wild. It's great.
Is.
It really is.
Yeah, and so he writes Philos narrates all of this to him. He writes it down, and he writes a book called "A Dweller on Two Planets," which is one of them, like a secretly hugely influential book in the esoteric world. And it's like it goes into this story about this Atlantean. And how he rises to power or some sort of political power in Atlantis. He finds gold. He befriends some Atlanteans. Then he gets into this throuple type situation.
Bad love triangle.
Atlantis. Yeah, and that never ends well. So one of his female lovers turned the other into a statue. He gets all moody and shit and flies around on his spaceship. On his airship / submarine,
which is so cool. It looks kind of like a worm with legs that can fly. It's wild.
Yeah, no, and this is all I will say, being a UFO aficionado, that is if the drawings were happened when he wrote the book, in the 1880s, early 1890s, then that's it looks like almost a modern UFO now does today, or at least the classic UFOs of the flying saucer era. But so that Atlantean dude, he dies. He gets reincarnated in the 1840s. A guy by the name of Walter. So he gets reincarnated to a guy named Walter.
Old Walt, hanging out there in California, is I have all these memories. Yeah.
So he served in the Civil War, lost a couple fingers, and then he goes out to California. and he meets this mystical Chinese guy who takes him inside of Mount Shasta, and from inside of Mount Shasta, he meets all these other kind of ascended master types people, and they let him in on the secrets of the world and say, hey, don't tell anybody. But then he automatically goes and tells Frederick Spencer Oliver, who writes it all down for him. But then they astrally project him to Venus, and he learns some more kind of like magical mystery tour type of stuff. And then he comes back, and then that's like the whole book. I mean, it sounds cool, but it's the most boring ass book that you ever have to read in your life.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to get into the weirdos, sister, if you want to like dip toes into, as you said, the esoteric, new age, woo woo, a dweller in two planets. Referencing this book is going to get you into some very cool parties, you know. Right? And being able to talk about this book will get you invited, if they exist, into all the best sort of eyes wide shut orgies that may be available in your town. Like, if that's what you're looking for, this is definitely the book to get. And there's another guy, which I don't know if this is like incidental, that his middle name is also Spencer. But Henry Spencer Lewis, this is one of my favorite dudes. He comes around a little later. He's obviously read A Dweller in Two Planets.
It's directly influenced by that.
And he's like, hell yes, Mount Shasta. And he gives even more illuminating details about the Lemurians who are in there. They live under them caves, girl. And this is what they do, and this is what they look like. And he gives so many details. And we're now getting ourselves into the 20th century that people are like, well, fuck me, I'm going to Mount Shasta. Enough people already start going to Mount Shasta between A Dweller in Two Planets and this new guy, this Henry Spencer Lewis, that it's like a problem. There's so many people. And by the way, they're not finding shit. They're looking around. There's no doors and there's no caverns or whatever. And I love it. Our guy, he finally writes a new piece and he says, all right, you know what? I just heard from them again. Ding. What's that? They said they're moved. They moved because there were too many of you poking around and they were getting crowded and bothered. So don't bother going anymore. They've left.
I love that. It was, it was like, what? You guys just ruined a good thing. Why?
Yeah.
Like, these Lemurians have been living here underneath Mount Shasta for thousands of years, like thousands and thousands, like 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 years. They've been living peacefully under this mountain. And all it took was like 3 years after the publication of his book to like make them up and leave for Mexico.
You guys should be ashamed of yourselves.
Yes, right. Look what you did.
And they obviously didn't leave because there's still an intensive population of folks around the base of Mount Shasta. And you outlined some of the books. Can you tell us what are some of your like most memorable kind of modern or contemporary sightings? I mean, there are a disproportionately high number of alien, fairy, troll, dwarf, lost time, UFO. I mean, around that area.
The little people sightings, I think, are my favorite, just because there's just a bunch of gnome sightings. Like, you don't hear too much of like real life gnome sightings, but like David the gnome like creatures just like rolling around. And there was just one dude that was just out camping. You have a lot of camping stories. I guess it's a big camping place. But one guy's just out there camping, and these gnomes walk up on him and they just start singing songs to him, like putting on shows. And he's like, okay, man, I gotta write this shit down. And so he starts writing it down, and they are critiquing him and like editing him as he's writing, like looking over his shoulder and stuff like that. And
there was like, don't do that, man, because the last asshole who wrote a book, we all half our people had to move. I want you to tell us about, because this was it was a sadder sort of story. Like, it's one of the few sort of Lemurian stories in which I see a victim, a potential victim, and it is the story of Richard and Ray and the Shaver mysteries. Generally speaking, there were these huge popularity of these sci-fi magazines and sci-fi itself, short stories, long stories, characters that, you know, we're so grateful because it gave birth to so much of our awesome sci-fi of the 1950s and 1930s and such. And one of these early magazines was called Amazing Stories, and it had those really cool, like visually interesting covers, and they would post stories and letters from various readers. And over the course of time, there's like 20 months where they printed 29 stories from this one particular guy that they called the Shaver Mysteries. And I wish you would tell us more about that.
Yeah, so Richard Shaver, he was a Pennsylvanian who moved out to Detroit to like follow his brother. He was really like enamored with his brother. They were really close together. So his brother moved out to Michigan to work in the border patrol, like customs. And this is during the Prohibition as well. And so he moved out there to be with his brother. And then as he was out there, he like joined, he was an artist and was like basically living like a bohemian lifestyle too. It was kind of interesting. Like he was really into like the bohemian scene of like early Great Depression, Detroit.
Yes.
But his brother ends up dying for whatever reason. And that sort of just is enough to push Richard over the edge, and he just starts getting these paranoid thoughts. He starts hearing voices inside of his head. Actually, not inside of his head. It's there. He was working at a auto factory at the time, and so they were speaking through the drill that he was using. And so he started hearing these voices. He ends up being committed by his wife and his wife's family, and then that's like a tragic story in and of itself because his wife ends up dying. He never has a relationship with his daughter because his wife's family like refuses to give up custody and stuff like that. And so he spends basically all of the 1930s and early 1940s in and out of mental institutions. And it's during these stays in the mental institutions that he starts having these experiences with these like evil dwarves that he calls the Darrows. And they're like tormenting him. So they're following him around and tormenting him, and he goes chasing after them and all of that. And so he finally gets out of the asylum, I think in 1945. And he immediately writes to Ray Palmer at Amazing Stories and saying, like, I have learned all of the ways of the Darrow, and they have this secret alphabet.
Yeah.
And he shares this alphabet that he has picked up from these Darrows with Ray Palmer, and Palmer publishes it, and it just creates this like maelstrom of letters and like a deluge of letters coming in of other people being like, hey, I've heard voices too. And so
well, and Ray kind of baits that hook too. It's like very modern, like he prints it in like a hey readers, like we got this crazy letter from a guy who says everything he's writing in here is real. Now we're not saying that it's real or not, but here's the alphabet. And as it correlates to like all human language and all human understanding. And we're just curious if anybody else out there knows this language or has heard of this before. And it's very much like the internet. The editorial comments of these amazing, in the sense that you just go, hey, anyone out there on the internet got a third boob? And they're like, oh, hell yes.
Just asking questions here.
I don't need to, I'm not saying, but if you do have a third boob, or whatever, any fucking, yes, you dangle a hook out there, man. And real or perceived, you're going to get a lot of response. And our guy, Ray, found that the perfect combination of this could be true. I don't know if it's true. It's super compelling. It's got a lot of room for interpretation. Sold a lot of fucking magazines. Right? Yeah.
And like that was his thing. Like he was a great, like just like carnival man. Like he was like a carnival barker. Like he did a great job of marketing it and turning it into a thing. And so he reaches back out to Shaver and was like, hey, let's write a story. Let's write a story for this. And so they end up writing, he writes a story, and Palmer heavily edits it. And that would become I Remember Lemuria. And that was the first of the Shaver mystery stories. And it's like talks about Lemuria in the sense that basically ancient Earth. Ancient Earth, there were these giant race of aliens came down to Earth, which was called Lemuria at the time. Oh, and I don't know how much you want me to go into the backstory of it, but it's just these huge giants. They create robots to like do all their dirty work for them. Yeah. Then the sun starts like giving them cancer and stuff, so they burrow into the earth, create these like underground tunnels to live in the earth, just to get away from the dangerous sun rays. But that doesn't help. So they go off to another planet and leave their robots here. And so those robots eventually evolve into us humans, or they stay as Darrows, and the Darrows are like these evil dwarves that are like just there to fuck with us, whatever they want to do. They will steal your keys, they'll kill Kennedy, and everything in between.
And like this, friends, if you are tracing the line, okay, this, what Justin just explained, if you can, this troubled man writes these stories that are, again, heavily edited by the editor to be more fantastic, more followable, more more readable for his audience. And he sticks the word Lemuria on it. And as he said, it talks about these underground, escaping from the sun, alien creatures, which brings us to Dr. Walter Siegmeister, who is like, oh, did someone say tunnels underground? Oh, did somebody say creatures under Mount Shasta, alien in origin, can change their appearance, because I can go ahead and do some lily padding back to older references and make them telepathic. And they they're not evil little dwarves to me. They're more our Madame Blavatsky version of like the third eye. And this guy, Dr. Walter Siegmeister, who has a bunch of different names, is the origin of the lizard people. So again, if you are hanging around in conspiracy theory circles on the internet, you've heard of the lizard people who live under LA, who occasionally are celebrities / they pretend to look like celebrities. My favorite little nugget from his story of Lemurians is the way in which humans eventually tricked them. The just so clever, impervious way that we finally tricked these lizard overlords, because if in fact there are lizard people living under LA, you, listener, may need to know this one simple trick.
Yeah.
To expose them.
I forget the word that tricks them.
And if you can't pronounce it, then this interview is over.
Yeah, right. He's a fascinating dude, like total weirdo, capital W kind of thing.
He looks crazy too, guys. You want to talk about pictures? Like he looks like that Rasputin-y kind of yuck.
He looks like Rasputin's unkept brother. Like it's
yuck.
He was a actual real doctor. Like he got his PhD at Columbia, I believe. So like Ivy educated person, but he got really into health foods in the 1930s, and so he was big into lecithin. It's like the fatty substances that are found in egg yolks. And so he kept trying to like package it and sell it, and so the post office kept like basically barring him from like doing any kind of mail. And so that's why he kept changing his name over and over again to get away from like post office
Getting
stuff.
away from big post office. Keeping him down.
The man keeping him down. And so he set up a health commune in Florida in the late 1930s. When that didn't go over well, he bought some land in Brazil and set up another place to set up a super race. Yeah, right. So Brazil and master race is probably not a good thing. And he also
not
practiced
problematic at all.
Yeah, and he also like preached abstinence. So I'm not sure how a master race is supposed to be created if you're celibate all the time.
Yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah,
that's tricky.
Yeah, but but it was while there in Brazil that like he started like just being in contact with a bunch of Theosophists down there who were telling him stories about like seeing UFOs coming out of the ground and things like that. And that led him down to just talking about the hollow earth and really going all in on like there being this inner world inside of Earth that people can go down into, and there's people living down in there now, and there's a big huge government conspiracy out there keeping this from you, and mostly was based around this mistaken belief from Admiral Byrd's expedition to the South Pole. in 1947. So Byrd led this expedition to the South Pole, basically an army exercise. There was a number of different reasons. It's actually set up the McHenry base, which is still there, and I think it's the major research lab there in Antarctica today. Like that's where it, like, its origins come from, this expedition. But Byrd, when he was flying over it, he made like some remark about, in the land beyond the pole, something like that. And so, Siegmeister, writing as Raymond Bernard, really took the ball with this and saying, well, Byrd saw something there, and that must have been that, there is this hollow earth, and there's, this great conspiracy out there of people living there.
Yeah, my favorite is Sims. Is that his name? Sims Hole?
Yeah, the Sims Hole.
Sims Hole. Sims is like, hey man, there's more than one hole, girl. We got one big hole, and seriously, you look at the drawings. I'm a foul-mouthed gal anyway, but it looks like a big butthole. A big old sphincter hole. Prolapsed butthole at the North Pole and the South Pole. And the idea is, according to Sims' whole theory, is that it's just at the perfect line. The Earth is still round, so he has that going for him. Mm-hmm. But that when you approach these holes, it's like kind of like an infinity pool. It's like the waves just kind of gradually go in at this like perfect 75-degree angle. And so that's why it's so invisible. And of course, all world governments have been conspiring to obscure it from our satellites and our maps. But that's how these creatures have been accessing the hollow part of the Earth for all these millennia.
Yeah. And that influenced people like Maurice Doreal, who was like really like into the whole idea of there being these lizard people living underground. And so he was the one that came up with the whole idea about these lizard people, and they have a secret language, and I'm trying to think of the word, the only way humanity
go ahead.
The only way humanity was able to figure out who these shape-shifting lizards were because they couldn't pronounce this one word. And
I believe I've got it.
Okay. Oh, yep, I have it too. Yeah.
Kininogen.
Yeah, kininogen. So
lizards
can't say that.
The lizards can't say kininogen. So and apparently this weapons and stuff are not going to work. You don't know. Their telepathic things might catch you up. But sort of like a CAPTCHA. It's like
It's really
sort of like trying to ask your laptop are you a robot? Because I'm not a robot. You just say the word kinogen, motherfucker. And if they can't, you ice them. No questions asked.
Nope.
They're a lizard person. I'm so glad.
That should be a band name too. Like that.
Kinogen. Kininogen. We are Kininogen. And then you have everyone in the audience say it back. And if they don't, just the floor drops out from under them. They go back to that hole where they came from. Now, I feel, generally speaking, that in this whole conversation about Lemuria and hidden, continents and underground and stuff, that it is simultaneously like just such a hotbed for great story and for great imagination. But it's so dubious because it's so tied up in just some of the worst instincts and some of the grossest kind of underworld misinformation that we have to navigate right now. And it feels to me like it's not overstating it to say that it kind of all comes back to Lemuria.
It's just writing the book itself, it gave me a new perspective on like how alternative narratives like get created and get spread. And we see that happening so much today. With Lemuria, it took 150 years, or it has 150 years of this like evolution from an idea about lemurs migrating onto Madagascar to underground lizard people who can't say kininogen. And so like you have that long spread, but like we see that like spread hyper focused nowadays, where something like Trump being shot gets like super super politicized or super like conspiracized, like almost automatically, and you have that like instantaneous alternative narratives being formed just online, just by everybody and anybody who can just spew out whatever they want, and people run with that, and just because it's online somewhere, someone will take that as fact and talk about it.
Yeah. And it gets so sticky, and it makes me sad, because I think that the beating heart of it, as it's manifests itself today, certainly in like American and national politics, is that it just feeds this general cynicism and distrust and paranoia. And it feels like on a ground of that is that unsteady, where everyone's like, yeah, but what if that person you're talking about is actually a telepathic being from a mystery island that is pretending and actually running our government? I mean, these become circumstances under which we can't really dialogue. And there are people at the highest levels in some cases that are giving credence to this stuff. Yeah. Like Michael Flynn has said the I am movement, which is another one that came in from this like branch of like, well, I mean, we're all functioning under the belief that Lemuria is real, therefore, and like anything that spreads from there is so hard. But here's my idea. Do you want to hear my plan?
Go for it.
I have a thought. So as we live in a very tricky time politically at the moment, and nobody knows what to believe, and there's mystery, and because there's mystery and nobody knows, then you don't know and I don't know, then who are you to tell me you know and I don't know, and it can get so yucky. Yeah. So what I propose is that if and when you out there in the world encounter someone who is dabbling in flat earth, Lemuria, Atlantean, I am, and it's starting to feel uncomfortable for you, you don't have to bail. What you can do is get back to the OG mystery, the one that literally started it all. So you can yes and your loony friend and bring them back in and say, what the fuck is the deal with lemurs though? Because I'll be honest with you, we still don't know how the fuck lemurs got to Madagascar, and you and this friend of yours can then sit down and leave behind you all of the complicated stuff and just get to like, I'm serious. I mean, it had to happen after the Cretaceous extermination, right? It had to happen after this extinction event, but it couldn't have happened before this event. So what was the deal there, man? And I think that in this way we can find peace.
That's still the biggest mystery of this whole thing, too, right? Is like, no one fucking knows how the lemurs got onto Madagascar. Maybe they never will.
Thanks again to Justin McHenry. Listen, do yourself a favor and find him in our show notes and on social media. His book, Lemuria, A True Story of a Fake Place, is available everywhere and I'm telling you, it's a hell of a good read. As for us, the next new episode is totally different. A deep dive into Mozart's sister. Okay, Nannerl Mozart was Wolfgang's older sister, and like him, also a child prodigy, and according to some, even more talented. Okay, find out why most of us have never heard of her, and all of us should. I am joined by award-winning musician and podcaster LAZOU, and you won't want to miss it. Until we meet again, our theme song was composed and performed by Kat Perkins. A reminder that you can find my sources, links to the books, documentaries, and articles I reference in the summary of this episode, or by emailing us, hilfpodcast@gmail.com, or messaging us on social media @hilfpodcast. This has been HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, reminding you that history is a party, man, and everybody's coming.